Hello, everyone, and welcome back for day two of the Data Science and Mining Conference. My name is Kevin Dagenet. I'm the CEO of Cascadia Scientific, and I want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us today as we look forward to building on the momentum from day one. Similar to yesterday, we'll hear from 4 speakers before moving into a web platform training session targeted for Cascadia Scientific users or those evaluating the platform. Today's training will focus on advanced tools, including our machine learning studio and our terrain analysis package. Once again, we have an exceptional group of presenters, and while the day's topic is improving day-to-day mine operations, I think a more accurate description would be that the day is split between that topic and also how data science relates to issues of environment, sustainability, and governance. Today's speakers include Matt Pasco, Chair of the Nlaka'pamux Tribal Council, who will share his expertise on digitization and Indigenous community engagement. Dr. John Steen, Director of the Bradshaw Research Initiative in Minerals and Mining at the University of British Columbia. He'll be discussing how ESG initiatives can be informed by data science. Following John, we'll hear from Dr. Ali Sufaste, Artificial Intelligence Lead with Vale, who will speak to smart coaching in digital mines. And then following a short pause for refreshments, which sadly we cannot provide, Cascadia's lead data scientist, Dr. David Reed, will discuss fuel forecasting for mine planning, referencing some great real-world examples. Finally, Nick Dembeck, one of our full-stack devs, will take over for the technical presentation of some of our tools. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Matt Pasco. Matt holds an MBA from the University of Saskatchewan. He's held faculty positions at the Indian Federated College, the University of Regina, and the Nicola Valley Institute of Technology. He's acted as bursar of the Institute of Indigenous Government and vice chair of the First Nations Health Authority. In addition to his present role as chair and title protector of the NNTC, Matt is chief of the community of Nlaka'pamux. He sits on the board of the All Nation Trust and is a successful cattle rancher on the land in which his community and family have been rooted for thousands of years. He's also someone I'm privileged to call a friend. The Nlaka'pamux territory includes large mining operations, which have provided Matt and his community's extensive opportunity for engagement, a topic that we're fortunate to be hearing about today. Matt is addressing us today from his hotel in Rome, where he's participating as a delegate in discussions with the Vatican surrounding the role of the Catholic Church in Canada's residential school system. Matt, thanks for joining us today. The floor is yours. I think Stephen is going to be running your slideshow, so just give him a nod every time you want him to move the slide. Please turn on your audio and video if possible.
Thanks, Kevin. How long would you like me to speak? Or
you have about 15 minutes, Matt.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for having me today. That is correct. I'm here in Rome addressing an issue that I think all of you have seen in the media throughout Canada for sure over the last year. And so we're on the path to finding a way to get these missing children to their homelands. So I don't know that I'll call it an exciting time, but it's certainly an important time. Kevin asked me to maybe have a few words to say about, sort of the Indigenous realm, how digitization plays out in that, and perhaps how our group uses that kind of information. I think for you folks, what's probably important is perhaps how the way we make decisions and do things will ultimately play a role in how the world gets shaped into the future. But before I do that, there's something else that I should also bring up. On April 1st of this year, it will mark the 37th anniversary of the longest standing injunction in the Commonwealth. My father, who's the former chief, stopped CN from double tracking a section of the line back in our backyard, essentially. We stopped them, and we've held that injunction for it'll be now 37 years. Last year, some of you may have seen me in the news. I think that'll make me the second. I know that I'll be the second person to have stopped trains. So last year, trains across Canada stopped for upwards to 72 hours. That was a result of what transpired at Lytton, the fact that a community that I represent was virtually lost, and we lost 2 community members, and I was able to stop the trains for that period of time. It should show you that when disciplined and thoughtful about the approaches we take, it holds a lot of weight. And so I do honor the fact that 37 years. So I do represent not just my community of Nlaka'pamux, but I also represent Lytton, Nlaka'pamux, and Boothroyd on a wider nation-based approach to how we do things, which is essentially how we try to address all things, is more on a nation basis. You can flip the... a couple of years ago, I did a presentation with a colleague. I call him a colleague now because he did such good work at Tech. I actually hired him, and he now works for the Tribal Council. But we did a presentation in 2018 with the International Council on Mining and Minerals. And essentially that conversation that we had was about how you can reconcile the world of mining with working with Indigenous groups. And the mine, the HVC, Highland Valley Copper Mine, is a mine that was put in without our consent, without anyone respecting who we are as Nlaka'pamux people. And they thought it was well within their rights to just push us aside and simply build this mine. So I decided at the time to name the paper, so to speak, as big trucks, no ore. It goes into the context of, I come from a rodeo background and a cattle background, and there's always this side joke about, whether or not the size of your hat determines the level of, I guess, respect you should deserve, or the size of your ranch and so on. So you'll hear in the country term, big hat, no cows. So in this case, we called it big truck, no ore. And we can laugh at it, but I do want everyone here to understand that the future of mining, like thinking that HVC can be built without my consent, without my people's direct input and understanding to the impacts it has on us, is just not the way of the future. And I'll even go further than that. Any company looking to do business in Nlaka'pamux territory, that includes Kevin's company, if you cannot be respectful of Nlaka'pamux values, you will be pushed out, because eventually not respecting who we are does create a competitive disadvantage for everyone. So there's some interesting papers, of course, that are out there. I know that one of the professors actually comes from Australia, and I've actually done some papers with one great professor by the name of Kevin Hindle, who the last I know, he was at Deakin University in Australia. But anyhow, he's done a lot of work on entrepreneurship and so on. So he has an interesting paper called Brave Spirits on New Paths, I believe. And so I just utilize that to say, hey, groups, companies, individuals, minds, if you want to do business, I suggest you chart a new path. Think about the different ways to doing that. And I'm going to have a couple of maps that show this concept of digitizing. And I'm going to show you the difference of sort of the conventional wisdom, or what people generally think about Indigenous people, whether they are meaningfully, consciously doing it or subconsciously. I won't get into that debate, versus say what our group does. And I won't say that every group does it, but our group certainly does. And so you're going to see real stark contrasts. And the best way I can do it before we get it up on the screen, and you can flip to the next screen, but before we get to that map, I always equate it to, generally in British Columbia, general society did not believe that Indigenous people walked above 3,000 feet above water. And so they think that anything on a mountainside or so on and so forth was generally not used. And so, it has free claim to use it. And that's really, really offside. Now, if we can utilize all of the research that Nlaka'pamux people have and put it into a realm, whether it's through digitization or whatever, and put it into a medium that helps us, and I guess helps everyone around us make better decisions, then ultimately I think it's going to help sort of in 4 areas, which UNDRIP actually speaks to. So the next, I don't know how many slides are going to speak to these things, but I'll just quickly go through them. So, in one case, UNDRIP tells us very specifically that self-determination is important. So for instance, how my community, how my nation decides to come together and do things, it needs to be on our terms. And of course, with all the policies and procedures, the fact that my whole family was killed off virtually, other than my father, through the residential school system, shows that this concept of self-determination has been kind of ripped from us. But we're certainly bringing that back, and it's front and center. And this slide actually speaks to that point of self-determination. So that'll be Article 3 and Article 5. I won't go through them all. You can flip to the next page, which is, I believe, going to be decision-making. Decision-making is the second very important piece for Indigenous groups contemplating the reality they want to go in. And as you're thinking about sort of, say, digitization of material and so on, we're really driving to that. So we're driving to self-determination. We're driving towards decision-making on our terms. So the interesting thing about decision-making, Indigenous groups, it's another thing that's been ripped from them. If I asked you folks, and I don't really get the chance to do that, I'll just pretend that I'm asking you and I'll answer the question, but you might ask yourself, was Matt elected as a chief? Or how was he chosen as a chief? We are one of the few communities in all of Canada that has never ever followed the Indian Act. We refuse to. And I think because we're so difficult, Kevin might be able to attest to this, I'm not easily moved. But if somebody has a great idea, I'll certainly buy it real quick. But that being the case, I was selected by the people. I was not elected. And that's the way we do things. Yet wider society talks about democracy and, the right to elections and so on and so forth. That may be true in the Western world, but that may not be true in the Indigenous. And there's nothing wrong with that. And in our case, the people decide. And if they don't want me to lead, well, they can certainly get rid of me if they so decide. But so decision making is that second one. We can go on to the next slide. The third one is free and prior and informed consent. In other words, are we able to come to terms with the issues that are in front of us? Do we have enough material, so on and so forth? And can we provide our consent to that? That's a very important piece and something that we've been fighting for a very, very long time. And it's actually starting to be utilized. Our agreements that we have with BC Hydro, with HVC Tech and other organizations certainly allow for that. And the last one is relationship to land, which is vitally important. So let's go to the next slide real quick, and I'll cut to the punch. Or not. Next slide.
We're on the next slide, Matt, relationship to the land.
Yeah, move it again. Sorry. I jumped the two together.
The next one? Yep. Sorry.
Yeah, go to the next one.
Okay, there we are.
Yes. So this is what the non-Indigenous, when they combine the information that they have put together and they put it into a place where they think the Indigenous realm is. So essentially what this means, looks like a generic map. It's actually a map of HVC. So in the middle, you'll see kind of a tan colored area. They essentially show 4 sort of rectangular green areas. That's essentially all they thought Indigenous people had to deal with, and those were reserve lands. They thought that on the left side of the screen, everything that we did as Nlaka'pamux people all followed the Thompson River. Go to the next screen. Please. Now that looks like a child got to it and certainly utilized the whole space. That is the combination of all data through stories, through archaeological work, through every concept of science, as well as storytelling and so on and so forth, is put onto this map. So this has to deal with everything from every trail known is mapped in here. You can hardly see them. They will be brown lines. All the blue are all the fishing stations. All the green polygons, if you will, are all the gathering components of everything we did. The red is the hunting. And essentially, once you've overlaid it all, as we do ARC work throughout the territory and all over HVC, the number of sites go up. And almost every place that we put on the map, on this map, has now been sort of found in truth through science, say through archaeology and so on. We're now the ones doing all the ARC work and so on. Before we did it, everybody thought of the other map and they refused to let us get up there and actually do the ARC work. Now, nobody denies the amount of ARC work and so on that we do. So this then shows that had the mine actually utilized our research in the early days, that mine may never have been built, or if it was, we would maintain way more ownership than we currently do. And that will be the next story that we come along. The rest of the slides, I will leave to you. I don't need to go over them. It essentially shows the various ways of which, when you meet with us, we utilize this information to build a decision-making process to provide organizations or projects with the consent or lack thereof that they would get. But anyways, we do use digitization, all types of research, as much as we can. We don't just stick to the stories and so on. We utilize those as well as all forms of science. So with that, I hope you get a better pick or a better understanding of what we do. And I can just let you sort of read through those on your own. Happy to answer any questions. So, thank you.
Thanks so much, Matt. There's not a Q&A session for the first talk, but I will ask one question, and maybe if you could just leave all of us with, if any of the people on this session are looking to start a process of Indigenous engagement, of approaching issues with Indigenous relations, what would be some advice you'd give on how to start that process and how to enter the process in the appropriate way?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And Kevin, you kind of followed that with your company. So many people think that, for instance, a technology type of company shouldn't have any interface with Indigenous folks. And that is far from the truth. Coming with a level of authenticity and just asking questions, I think really is the way to bridging that start of a relationship and an understanding. So don't be afraid to reach out to communities. And please do not treat every Indigenous community as the same, or that you've dealt with one that you know what the other is like. There are so many differences. We are not the same. But have that authenticity when you go to meet. Be honest in that conversation and understand that they have a lot to offer, which includes the resource on the ground, that without their consent, it's going to be infinitely more difficult to do business.
Thanks so much for joining us today, all the way from Italy and at late at night a lot as well. So thanks again. I think you've brought us a lot to think about. Yeah, and we'll keep these conversations and dialogues going.